Okay, Lauren, if you keep an eye on the waiting room for us, that would be great. We have got a lot to cover, so I'm going to probably just crack on whilst we wait for people to join us. So welcome everybody. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of three co-founders and directors of a company called Go for Growth. If you've joined one of our sessions before, then you'll probably know who I am. But if not, I am a procurement professional by trade, and I've been working with Go for Growth for the last 4 years. Thank you for joining us on this morning's session on developing partnerships, collaboration and consortia. Whilst I am your host today, I'm joined by my colleague Lauren from Go for Growth as well. Morning, Lauren. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
And I have to say, whilst I might be running the session today, all credit and all thanks must go to Cardiff University and especially to Dr. Jane Lynch, who has supported us in so many of these collaboration sessions before and who has kindly given us so much of today's information on collaboration and partnership working. We have got a lot of information to get through today, so I will be running at a fairly fast pace at the beginning. So we are in a Zoom meeting this time. The last time we did it was in a Zoom webinar. So you can choose to be camera on or camera off, whatever you would prefer. We will be recording the front end of the session this morning, where I'm giving you some information on collaboration, partnerships and consortia. We'll stop recording when we get to the discussion point so that everybody has the opportunity to speak freely. We won't record that second half of the session. We do want the session to be as interactive as possible. If you want to add any comment as we go through or ask any questions, I think you can put your hand up or you can use the Q&A function if you would prefer to. And Lauren will keep an eye on anybody who is asking any questions either through Q&A or putting their hands up. We've got time set aside for discussion. And Go for Growth is a collaboration. It's basically a consortia of two businesses. So we do have lived experience in Go for Growth of working in partnership. And I'm really happy to share my own experiences, but it would be super great to hear about yours. Anyone wanting to share the good, the bad, and even the ugly, please do either pop your hand up or let us know that you want to have a chat and we'll bring you into the discussion. The session this morning has effectively got two main purposes. Firstly, to give an overview of partnerships and collaboration, what they are and how to go about them. And secondly, to help businesses who are looking for other businesses to work with. We wanted to carve out a space and a time dedicated to meeting and hopefully going on to chat more with businesses after the session. We've got 45 minutes set aside today. We know everyone's super busy, so we'll really try to stick to time. And I'm going to try and stick to sort of 20 minutes at the top end on the information bit, which should leave us around 20 minutes for discussion afterwards. For that reason, because this is about collaboration and working together, if you would like to, it would be really great if you could introduce your business in the chat to other attendees. And hopefully the chat is functioning correctly. If not, let us know. I've popped on the screen some information that you might want to put into the chat. If you could put it all in one paragraph that will keep all the information together, that would be great. It's not mandatory, so please don't feel like you have to share that information. Our plan is to share the information that's entered into the chat with all registered attendees. So if you do share that information, please do so with the knowledge that that will be shared with anybody that's registered, whether they've come to the session or not today. So if you don't want your details to be shared, please don't feel that you have to put them in the chat. It's only the second time that we have done something to try and be as interactive as this. So we are learning as we go on these events. And we've developed it following feedback from providers about having that time and space to chat to each other. Hopefully it'll work well. Please do tell us though if you think we could do something better or differently, or if you think this needs to be an in-person event. Please do just tell us what you would like us to cover, etc., etc. So you can see on screen the stuff that we're going to go through today also. So I've popped on there some information that I talked about in terms of entering into the chat. So if you want to put your name, your business name, what sector you're in, whereabouts you are, or where you're looking for a partner, if that's different, contact details that you're happy for others to have, and a brief overview of your business. And that will hopefully help people get to know each other whilst we're going through this session today. So the aim of today's session, obviously we're talking about partnerships, collaboration, and possibly forming consortia of some kind. We're going to be focusing on working with other businesses to secure opportunities and when this might be an appropriate route to take. And I think there are some key questions, first of all, to think about. Whether you would like to grow your business. Have you considered collaborating with other small business leaders, sector enterprises, charities, etc., as a route and mechanism for that growth? And I know that seems like a really strange question, especially as this is an event dedicated to working with others. But it can often feel in the too difficult space, or it can be really difficult to wrap our heads around how this might affect our ability to compete in what can often be fairly complex markets. And have you heard of supplier consortium? As always, with this stuff, there are different terminologies that are thrown around. For the purposes of today, what we mean by a supplier consortium is basically just more than one organisation coming together. Some consortia that Dr. Lynch has worked with as part of her collaboration activity can involve up to 7, 8 different types of organisations of different sizes. So it's possible to go beyond even just one partner. But supplier consortium effectively is when more than one business comes together. And that question for you to consider in terms of improving your chances of securing higher value contracts. There is a real drive in the public sector to access the whole of the marketplace. And of course, in the UK, 99.9% of businesses are classified as small to medium enterprises. But it is a fact that it still remains more difficult for smaller organisations and some voluntary sector organisations to compete. And sometimes that's because smaller organisations on their own might not meet the selection criteria on things like turnover that are required to take part or to qualify for an opportunity. And so one of the reasons to collaborate might simply be to improve chances of securing higher value public sector contracts, as well as other reasons around spreading risk, mitigating risk, managing complexity in contract, and developing or adding skills and services to deliver contracts going forward. So there are some key questions that we all need to ask ourselves when we are entering into collaboration or thinking about collaboration. And the first question is, why would we collaborate? Thinking about what are the other options that are there that would help my business to grow if I don't collaborate. So if you're thinking about your options appraisal, where does collaboration sit in that options appraisal? There are some myths around collaboration that Cardiff University and the Institute of Collaborative Working talk about. It can often be heralded as a really easygoing kind of relationship, and that actually anybody can be collaborative. And I'd like to think that anybody can. However, it definitely isn't necessarily an easygoing relationship to have. Collaborating in business is a whole different ballgame to collaborating in our personal lives, where it might come a little bit more naturally to us. However, it's definitely not insurmountable at all. But it does require actually quite a lot of senior buy-in. And in a smaller organisation, that might not be too difficult if we are the senior executive in the business. It also requires a lot of investment in terms of time in upfront stages. So it's important to understand why you need to collaborate. What's in it for me? What am I going to get out of that collaboration? And for some reasons, it might be the other points here. So joint working might be part of your strategy, for example. And it's important for you to understand why you need to collaborate. It might be that it'll lead you to new supply networks, for example. It might lead you to new business opportunities in the future, and it might help you to fill some of the skill gaps that you currently have in your organisation. So it could help you with logistics, it could help you with IT. And actually, if I think about Go for Growth, Go for Growth is a collaboration of 2 businesses, Net Positive Futures and All Things Procurement. And what we brought together were complementary skills on procurement, both public and private sector procurement, sustainability, social value, and carbon literacy, to form an organisation called Go for Growth to offer that skill set in a joint way to the marketplace. So you'll be thinking about your current mission. What's my organisation's goals? What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities to collaborate? We'll talk about strengths and weaknesses shortly. How will a partnership help my business to grow? It's a really important question. And the other really important question is our organisation ready to collaborate? Can we really embrace it? Collaboration actually is a process of managing relationships, and we know this firsthand in Go for Growth. It's a process for managing relationships in a better or a different way, and it requires a certain set of behaviours. So the cultural side of things is really important to consider. And if you're not getting that senior level buy-in, then it's actually going to be really tough to commit the time that's required and the commitment that's required to make collaboration work. And then in terms of structure, there are lots of different options in terms of what sort of consortium you would set up. We're going to go through a couple shortly. We're going to go through a lead body model, and we're going to go through a special purpose vehicle, an SPV. What we would suggest, and the advice and guidance that we took from Cardiff Uni and Dr. Jane Lynch, was that you should start these conversations early. It takes time to have these conversations. And so the advice is start these conversations at least 6 months in advance of any contract opportunity that you might want to go for. It takes time to form a relationship. We know that relationships in all parts of our life take time, and trust, for example, takes time to develop. So having those conversations early on is helpful. And you can't rush them. If you try to rush them, there's lots of examples where it's been unsuccessful in the longer term because the investment wasn't made at the beginning end. And so there is a real encouragement to think about collaboration as a long-term strategy for your business. And so some of the ideas, we know, for example, that the two heads are often better than one when we're thinking about how we can solve a problem statement. And being in a smaller business or being self-employed, for example, leadership, it can often feel like a lonely place, and especially so coming out of the pandemic. So thinking about what can I do differently with my business? So things like the global pandemic don't affect us just as bad if next time, if there is a next time, or whatever the next time looks like. How can we build resilience into that business? Is partnership working a way of doing that? And it's an opportunity to look outside of your business. So Jane asks us to look about the financial crash in the third quarter of 2007, early 2008. You'd see signs on businesses on high streets saying closed due to recession. And actually what that meant really was, in practical terms, that they were closed due to cash flow problems. We didn't see that recession coming, just like we didn't see COVID coming. And even if we look back now, there were lots of indicators that it might happen. We just didn't anticipate necessarily the way that it would affect us. So in the longer term, to not be complacent, it's about constantly looking outside of our business and being really aware of the macro environmental challenges that might potentially risk our business, and looking at collaboration as a potential mechanism for de-risking that. But of course, one of the greatest challenges is thinking about who the right partner is. And it's actually probably even harder to meet and build relationships with other businesses when we're living so much of our lives in the metaverse, the virtual world, if you like. And it is one of the reasons that we're trying an event like this to see if it can help. We're hoping that today will be a good place to meet other businesses, find like-minded people, and hopefully what you'll take away is a bunch of virtual business cards, if you like. And you might even go on to work with one or two businesses that are here today. If you do form relationships on the back of today, we would love to know about it. So please do feel free to let us know. And of course, we're going to want to think carefully about who we want to work with in the future, and really importantly, what value businesses will bring to our existing business. And the SWOT matrix, the SWOT framework, almost everyone probably will have seen a SWOT or have heard about a SWOT in some way, shape or form. If you've not, we can send some further information through. But it's one of the most widely used frameworks, and it's very good for understanding collaboration. So it can be a really good tool actually for starting off a collaborative partnership arrangement. And basically, you would first identify as an individual organisation what your strengths and weaknesses are. And your strengths effectively become your opportunities, and your weaknesses, if not addressed, can very quickly become your threats. So ideally, when you're looking at thinking about who might be your partner, you're looking at a complementary set of strengths or complementary set of values. And if you want to try and exploit those strengths to make them become opportunities, you probably need to look for a partner who will help you address some of your weaknesses. Otherwise, it can cause problems later on. If you're all collaborating with all the same strengths and not addressing any of those weaknesses, if there's no complement in there, you could actually very easily become competitors against each other, competing rather than cooperating. So using the SWOT matrix individually and collectively as a potential consortium can really help you to find the right partner. So we said we would chat about what kinds of structures there are if you're thinking about working with more than one organisation to make you contract ready, for example, to open up opportunities to help you grow your business. This particular model on screen could be really useful, and it's called the lead body model. It's well known in industry, it's well known and well used in public sector, and it is one that the Institute of Collaborative Working and certainly our colleagues in Cardiff University would recommend. And the reason they would do so is it gives a little bit of structure. It also speaks the language of collaboration. So people have told ICW, us, and lots of other organisations that typically where collaboration can go wrong is that there's an imbalance of power. In that you've always got somebody who makes all of the decisions and then everybody else follows. With the lead body model, however, you will have a lead body organisation. That could be the organisation with the highest turnover, but it doesn't have to be. But actually, when it comes to decision making, you have a steering group. And so one member has one vote. So everyone's responsible equally for making decisions about what the consortium gets involved in, how it's run, how it's managed, etc. Any overhead costs, for example, if you were looking to tender for public sector contracts, the public sector would need to award to one legal entity. So effectively, that would be the lead body in this model. And those administrative overhead costs shouldn't be absorbed in an imbalanced way. The cost of that would then be spread and split in a way that is proportionate and reflective of how the lead body model organisations are being utilised. So it would be spread and split across the consortium members. I did just want to say, there's a lot of free information available. I don't know if anyone has done any sort of searching for guidance on collaboration consortia. The Welsh Government website has got some great stuff on joint bidding. There's some tools in there to help you set up and manage your consortia, get your consortia working. If you go into whatever search engine you use and type joint bidding Wales, it will give you the guidance that is available. One of the things that's really important in the lead body model is the relationship between the lead body organisation. They're the central point of contact, the main port of contact. But ultimately, that relationship between lead body and the rest of the consortium around decisions are that they are shared and agreed equally. And it's such an important point to make that making a consortia work needs to have that equity in there in terms of decision making. Another model to have a look at is the SPV or special purpose vehicle model. It's probably for collaborations which have been well established. So you might start off in lead body model and then you might choose to move to an SPV. And it's where a consortium becomes a legal entity in and of itself. So that individual organisation or those individual organisations that form the consortia continue to trade in and of themselves. They trade as their own organisations and a percentage of the business is managed through the consortium. That's effectively the model that Go for Growth has taken. So Net Positive Futures, all things procurement, they continue to trade in and of themselves. So our special purpose vehicle was that we set up Go for Growth as a legal organisation in and of itself, as a separate organisation. It is a really effective model to use. It can take longer to set up, and it is a legal structure, so it does need setting up correctly. So it's likely that you'll need some guidance for SPV from either your accountant or potentially legal. And in the case of Go for Growth, we actually took both. We took legal advice and we took accountancy advice. And we also set up as a social enterprise, not at the same time as setting up Go for Growth. Actually, we were a consortia. Then we set up the SPV and then we became a social enterprise. So we've done our evolution in stages, if you like. And I think it's important before we start to do the sums. So a good old spreadsheet will be super helpful. You can do this as sophisticatedly as you like, but think about the overhead costs that might go into setting up the consortia, getting it running, things like insurances, banking, what administrative resources you might need. All of those things need to be costed out and shared equally amongst the consortium partners, or at least in a way that's proportionate to the inputs, outputs in the consortia. It's really important to do this at the outset, as opposed to trying to do it retrofit once you're up and running. It can lead to difficult conversations later on if we're not careful. And I wouldn't for a second be recommending necessarily to everybody that everybody needs to become accredited to an international standard to be able to manage collaborative relationship, but there is an awful lot of free help out there. So what I would suggest, if you're thinking about bidding as a consortia, and you're thinking about using a more formalised approach to structure your collaboration, information from ICW, Institute of Collaborative Working, will be super helpful. There are 8 principles that you can see in front of you in the screen. It is a good model. It's not just tried and tested in Wales, and even in the UK, but right across the world. So there's also lots of free information on their website, and they have their own network of events. So lots of information there to help you get started if you need it. But the reality is that where most organisations start to collaborate, they start where it says working together, sort of halfway down. And they think, well, we've got this project, we'll get up and running. What do we need around the table? Let's just get started, and off they go. And what they don't start to think about is, why do we need to collaborate? Why is collaboration the right vehicle? We don't necessarily stop to think about what the individual objectives of each organisation in the collaboration are. What are our values? What's our vision? And if we don't start to think about those things at the outset, it can come as a bit of a nasty shock later if you find out that, for example, one business is striving to reduce costs and the other one is looking to add value and increase quality. Little contradictions like that, if they're not understood at the outset and managed at the outset through effective conversation, they can cause you problems much later on. And the other really big area, of course, is knowledge. What do we need to know? Think about what data we've got. We're surrounded by big data, and often we're sharing data for data's sake. And we often don't have time to analyse data. If in the consortium you decide that sharing data is going to be a core part of what you do, we need to think about how we do that, how it will help and support the consortium going forward. And it's a really good idea to think about the types of data that you'll need. And it's important to have that conversation on knowledge and data, because, of course, it will become the intellectual property of the consortium, and we need to understand who owns what. If we don't talk about it at the outset, when we come to the end of a project or the end of a contract, what happens to that information? Who owns it? Where does it go? How will it be shared? We've got cybersecurity issues as well at the moment, and we might have incompatible platforms. So don't underestimate how important it is to have those, and they can be uncomfortable conversations sometimes. Have them at the outset. Using a structured process can make it a lot less uncomfortable, actually, because it's all part of the process. It takes the emotion out of it a little bit. It's part of the process for managing effective collaborative relationships. And then you can think about the assessment internally in terms of what your strengths, weaknesses, etc. are. And then once you've got together, working together, and you're creating value, it doesn't stop there. You need to think about how you're going to communicate. So how you set up your consortia, and then you're fortunate enough to win your contract. The hard work obviously doesn't stop there. You've had a lot of upfront difficult conversations. The rest then should be about building that value and creating that value. Thinking about, when shall we meet? What's realistic? Where shall we meet? How often do we communicate? Go for Growth as a board of directors. We get together strategically once a quarter in person to make sure that we are assessing our pathway and our vision. Are we doing what we said we would do, and are we doing it the way that we said we would do it? What's working, what's not working, etc. But we also have a weekly catch up for an hour, the 3 of us, virtually, to do the practicalities of running our business. But we thought about that right at the outset, and it's really helped us to gel and grow together as a business. And importantly, at the outset, you want to think about your exit strategy, and it can feel actually really difficult to think about the divorce when you're getting married. But we know that that will come directly out of your knowledge strategy, thinking about your types of knowledge, the intellectual property that you're going to generate together, and how you might use that. It is important to think about what happens if somebody doesn't want to do this anymore. What happens, God forbid, in the demise of one part of the organisation, etc., etc. So think about what your exit plan might be before you enter into an agreement. So what does Cardiff Uni, the business school in Cardiff Uni and Dr. Jane Lynch think that makes the fundamentals of good collaboration? So number one, it has to be leadership. You need collaboration champions in your organisation, people that really understand the benefit of collaborative working. What's your value proposition around it? What's the benefit to the organisation? How are you measuring that and managing it? And within the consortium, any contract that's managed through the consortium relationship, it might be that for some businesses, for example, that's worth 5% of their annual turnover, whereas for others, it might be worth 60% of their annual turnover. And it's really important to understand at the outset that level of importance that each part of the consortium will be giving what you're doing as a collaboration. Be honest, be open, be clear, don't be put off by awkward conversations, cooperate with each other, live the values that you've got as organisations. And it's really about exhibiting those right behaviours from day one. And there is a triple win in here that I can see. There's a win for you, there's a win for your collaboration partner, and there's a win for the end user of your product and service as well. So there's lots of opportunities to be gained. It is a tried and tested model. We know it delivers great benefits, but it doesn't do that without the effort that you need to put in at the outset. And just a couple of things to add, and then we'll move on into conversation. Leadership is really important. That structure for collaborative working, addressing increasingly complex challenges through collaborative working. It's really, really important. If it's done informally, it can be harder to manage that over the longer term. So think about the formalization of structure behind it. If you don't have a structure in place, it can cause problems later on. The capability of collaborative leadership is essential. So in terms of your capabilities, it might be that you're a very small business, for example, it's you and there's nobody else because there isn't anybody else to send. If that's the case, be honest about your skill set, be honest about your time allocation, your time commitment. Do you have development of skills that you need to do? Can you build trust? How do you build trust? How do you manage that within the collaboration? I spend every day, probably all day, and most of us will be like this now, I think, on Teams or Zoom, and I have my favorites in terms of how we want to run projects, but I think we have to be aware of the challenges that technology brings and that online working might bring, but we're also the opportunities and how we can use those things effectively. The advancement of technology will improve our ability to work collaboratively with businesses that aren't necessarily in the same locality as us. It can make co-authoring documents easier. Innovation sessions can be super interactive these days, all using technology. We don't actually always have to be in the same room. But there are also health warnings that come with that stuff. So take technology in the manner that it is and spirit that it's intended. And then finally, as with anything, collaboration brings challenges as well as opportunities. Collaboration carries a risk in and of itself if it isn't managed well, particularly thinking about your client whose contract it is and the contract that you're going to be fulfilling through consortium working. You need to make sure that you run that contract in a way that your client doesn't feel any of the challenges that collaborative working might bring you as an organisation. If you're in a consortium, particularly if you're thinking about public sector work, then you need to be thinking and working as one business. That's why the lead body model or an SPV can be really useful. If you take a loose informal structure to manage in the consortium, it will almost certainly cause problems later on. Effective communication, I've mentioned as well, thinking about the time and frequency of how you meet. Thankfully, we've got lots of tools to be able to do that. I would also think about Go for Growth as an example. When we get together weekly and quarterly, it really helps. We had a relationship prior to coming together. So we didn't come together as a consortia cold. We'd worked together for probably about 10 years as in different organisations. So we knew of each other and we knew that our values were there and we had mutual respect for each other. And so we were building from a strong base. That won't happen with everybody. You might have to build that trust basis from scratch. Finance, insurance, TUPE rules, take advice around that structuring of the consortium. We can connect you with specialists if you need some help and advice and guidance in there. If you're members of local chambers or the Federation of Small Businesses, for example, or if you're a member of the Growth Hub in your local area, then actually there's likely to be support around that can help you start and continue to manage your consortium. And the final thing to say is the way to view consortium in our advice and the advice from Cardiff University Business School and the Institute of Collaborative Working is it's a long-term strategy. This isn't something that you would be necessarily doing as a short-term thing. And so thank you. That is everything I wanted to run through. I know that I have rattled through a ton of information. We'll share the slides, so you'll get all of that information. If anybody wants to book a one-to-one with either myself or Lauren to talk about collaboration in more detail, you are more than welcome to do so. So I'm just going to pause the record.